The theme that I'm going to speak about I have entitled Progressive Commitment. And I'm going to take my examples from the life of Abraham. Let's just think about the word progressive for a moment. In many, many places in the Bible, both Old Testament and New, the life of the believer is called a walk. Some of the modern translations in the New Testament have changed the word walk to live. I think that's a pity, because you can live and be static, but you cannot walk and be static. The very use of the word walk indicates that the believer's life must be progressive. We must be on the move. It says in the 4th chapter of Proverbs, the 18th verse, the pathway of the righteous is as the shining light that shineth more and more unto the perfect day. So righteousness is a pathway, it's not a seat. And if we are walking in that pathway, it's getting brighter and brighter every day. And if the light is not getting brighter every day, we need to examine ourselves whether we're really in the pathway. If you're living by yesterday's light, today you're in danger of becoming a backslider. So it's progressive. Then I want to say a little about Abraham. There are many wonderful men of God portrayed in the Scripture, all of whom are examples to us in various ways. But Abraham is unique. He's called the father of all who believe. Through faith in Jesus Christ, the seed of Abraham, the Scripture says we have become children of Abraham. It doesn't say we're children of David or children of Moses, but we're children of Abraham. To me, that's very precious, because that's the basis on which I inherit all the blessings that Abraham was promised by God. I've come by faith into the direct line of spiritual descent from Abraham. If you're Christ's, you're Abraham's. That's what Paul says, and in Romans 4 he says we are Abraham's children if we walk in the steps of the faith of our father Abraham. There's an if. Being a child of Abraham means you walk the way Abraham walked. Jesus rebuked the natural descendants of Abraham in his day and said God could raise up children to Abraham from these stones if that was all that was involved. But the thing that matters is walking the way Abraham walked. So I'm going to take today 5 of the steps of faith of Abraham. And I want to show you that in a certain sense, each step was a further commitment to God. And it so happens that in each case, the commitment to God meant relinquishing something human. So the further Abraham went with God, in a sense, the more he relinquished of human desires, relationships, and affections. Now that's not contrary to what I'm saying about we have to be right with man as well as with God. But somebody said, I think, at least it came to me in connection with the pattern of the tabernacle. The tabernacle has always been one of the most fascinating themes in the Bible for me. You may find it dull and insignificant, complicated. Every time I study the tabernacle of Moses seriously, it implants in me a deep desire to go further with God. I don't know any teaching in the Bible that inspires me personally with a deeper desire for holiness than the teaching of the tabernacle. It would not necessarily affect everybody that way, but it does me. And as I view the tabernacle as a kind of pattern of approach to God, the ultimate, the aim being the innermost sanctuary, the Holy of Holies, what impresses me is there was only one piece of furniture in it. In fact, the further you went with God, the fewer your options. Until you have no option but God. Now that, I believe, is spiritual progress. And in a certain sense, it always means giving up something. And the point where you stop giving up is the point where you cease spiritual progress. So let's look at the steps of Abraham's faith, starting this morning in Genesis chapter 11. We need to read the last verses of chapter 11 and the first verses of chapter 12. Beginning in Genesis 11:31. And Terah took Abram his son, and Lot the son of Haran, his son's son, that's his nephew, and Sarai his daughter, that's Abraham's nephew, and Sarai his daughter-in-law, his son Abraham's wife. That is Terah, Abram, Sarah, Sarai, her original name was, and Lot. And they went forth with them from Ur of the Chaldees to go into the land of Canaan. And they came unto Haran and dwelt there. Notice their objective was Canaan, but they didn't get there. Haran is just about halfway between Ur and Canaan. And the days of Terah were 205 years, and Terah died in Haran. Now, there's no indication really in the Old Testament why they didn't complete the journey they set out on. And apparently, Abraham knew all along that Canaan was where he ought to go. Read now the beginning of the next chapter. The Lord had said unto Abraham, Get thee out of thy country, from thy kindred, from thy father's house, unto a land that I will show thee. And I will make of thee a great nation. I will bless thee and make thy name great, and thou shalt be a blessing. And I will bless them that bless thee, and curse him that curseth thee. And in thee all families of the earth shall be blessed. So Abraham departed as the Lord had spoken with him, and Lot went with him. And Abraham was 75 years old when he departed out of Haran. I want you to see that Abraham's obedience was progressive. He didn't meet all the conditions immediately. And his progress only continued as he met the conditions. Now, if you turn to the book of Acts, chapter 7, verse 4, you'll find out why Abraham couldn't make the whole journey the first time. It's one of these marvelous examples where the New Testament illuminates the Old. This is the speech that Stephen made before the Jewish council in Jerusalem. And he's describing the beginning of Abraham's journey. And he says in verse 2, The God of glory appeared unto our father Abraham when he was in Mesopotamia, before he dwelt in Haran, and said unto him, Get thee out of thy country, from thy kindred, come into the land which I shall show thee. Notice this had happened in Ur, not in Haran. It may have been renewed in Haran, but it started in Ur. Then came he out of the land of the Chaldeans, and dwelt in Haran. And from thence, when his father was dead, he removed him into this land wherein ye now dwell. What was the hindrance? His father. Because God had said, leave your country, your father's house, that means your father's family, and your relatives. 3 things he had to leave: his country, his family, his relatives. Well, he left his country, but he took his father with him. And he could not go the complete journey as long as his father was alive. When his father died, obstacle number 1 was removed. He completed the journey to the land of Canaan. Now, you can spiritualize that a whole lot of ways, and I'm not too much in favor of spiritualizing things, but frankly, there are lots of us who want to get to the promised land, but we want to take Father with us. And God says you can get halfway and no further. Do you know some people who got halfway and didn't get any further? Maybe you're one of them. Maybe you tried to take Father along. What is Father? Well, it could be a whole lot of different things from the past. Certain traditions, certain associations. a whole lot of things. They could be religious traditions, religious associations, denominational, financial, business, social. I don't think most of the smart set ever get to Canaan. One thing that often happens is you have to change your friends. So, don't take father along if you want to get to Canaan. I hope you understand that I'm not speaking in any terms of disrespect for our parents, but this is a kind of analogy we're using. All right. Commitment number 1 was leaving Ur. Commitment number 2 was leaving Haran, but he couldn't leave Haran as long as he had his father with him. But he still hadn't met all the conditions. What was the unfulfilled condition? He had somebody else along that was not on the terms of the contract. Who was that? Lot. That's right. And from your relatives, it's saying. Lot was a relative. It's interesting, you probably don't know, but in the Hebrew, the word Lot has a specific meaning. It means a veil, something that covers the eyes. It's used in that way as a noun in the Old Testament. So he could get into the promised land with Lot, but he couldn't see the promised land because he had a veil over his eyes. And God arranged the circumstances where they had to come to a confrontation. So we read in Genesis 13, verse 5, and I'm going to read quite a section to verse 17. I want you to pick out the significant facts. And Lot also, which went with Abraham, had flocks and herds and tents. And the land was not able to bear them, that they might dwell together, for their substance was great, so that they could not dwell together. And there was a strife between the herdmen of Abraham's cattle and the herdmen of Lot's cattle. And the Canaanite and the Perizzite dwelled then in the land. And Abraham said unto Lot, Let there be no strife, I pray thee, between me and thee, and between my herdmen and thy herdmen, for we are brethren. Is not the whole land before thee? Separate thyself, I pray thee, from me. If thou wilt take the left hand, then I will go to the right. Or if thou depart to the right hand, then I will go to the left. And Lot lifted up his eyes and beheld all the plain of Jordan, that it was well watered everywhere before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah, even as the garden of the Lord, like the land of Egypt, as thou comest unto Zoar. Then Lot chose him all the plain of Jordan, and Lot journeyed east. And they separated themselves the one from the other. And Abraham dwelled in the land of Canaan, and Lot dwelled in the cities of the plain, and pitched his tent toward Sodom. But the men of Sodom were wicked, and sinners before the Lord exceedingly. And the Lord said unto Abraham, after that Lot was separated from him, Lift up now thine eyes, and look from the place where thou art, northward and southward and eastward and westward. For all the land which thou seest, to thee will I give it, and to thy seed forever. And I will make thy seed as the dust of the earth, so that if a man can number the dust of the earth, then shall thy seed also be numbered. Arise, walk through the land in the length of it and in the breadth of it, for I will give it unto thee. There's much to observe in that. God did not intend Lot to remain with Abraham. So God arranged the circumstances that caused them to part. One of the things I've learned in the spiritual life is learning to bend with the pressures. Sometimes we make up our minds what we ought to do, and we stick out and do it. And we're not heeding that God is speaking to us and saying, this isn't what I want you to do. One of our problems often is obstinacy. We've got our minds made up the way it's going to be, and this is what God wants, and if it kills me, I'm going to do it. Well, it might kill you. God might have to kill you, because that attitude is not going to find the will of God. Abraham didn't say, well, listen, we started out together and we're staying together and you stay with me. He took a very gentle line. One of the talks I gave on the fruit of the Spirit was on gentleness. And it really spoke to me. Gentleness or meekness. And the thought that God impressed upon me is that meekness is not weakness. Meekness is a mark of strength. Only a strong person can be meek. And Abraham was meek. He said, all right. Remember, Lot was the younger man. He was the nephew. Abraham could easily have said, all right, well, if we're going to separate, I'm going to make the choice. But he said, Lot, you choose. Do you know what I believe? I believe myself that Abraham had total confidence in God, that God would use Lot's choice to work God's will. Are you ever prepared to do that? To give up your right and say, Lord, I'll surrender. And if he gets what I ought to have, that's between you and him. And I believe when you take that attitude, no one will ever get what you ought to have. You remember the words of John the Baptist, a man cannot receive anything except it be given him from above. I really believe that. I do believe in most instances I've come to the place, if people want to fight, I'll walk out. Because whatever God really has destined for me, no one can take unless I do wrong. Well, Lot made the wrong choice because there was something wrong in his heart. And he was looking for the material before the spiritual. So he went to the place which was rich and promised even greater material prosperity, but it was a corrupted, evil environment. One of the significant things about Lot is that he took his whole family into Sodom, and he never got them out. That's one of the greatest warnings to me of the responsibilities of fathers. We can make a wrong choice and take our family with us. We may get out, they may not. And we are in some measure responsible for their being in Sodom. I've always wondered how Lot felt when he walked out of the smoking ruins of Sodom, or walked out of Sodom and turned back and looked at those smoking ruins and remembered that members of his own family were there. And he took them. However, it's Abraham we're talking about, not Lot. Now look in verse 14. The Lord said unto Abraham, after that Lot was separated from him, lift up now thine eyes, and look from the place where thou art. As long as Lot was with him, he couldn't see his inheritance. God didn't give him the insight. But when Lot was separated, when the veil was removed, Abraham didn't have to move. He just had to look. And every direction he looked was going to be his. And then the Lord said to him, don't just look, arise and walk through it, because it's all going to be yours. But he could not see his inheritance until he'd made that third commitment to let Lot go. Notice every commitment was letting something go. He let his city go. His father was taken from him. Now his nephew was taken from him. What's the next? There may be others, but I'm going to go on to the story of Ishmael. You remember that after a number of years, I believe it was about 12 years in the land, no sign of the promised heir, and so Abraham and Sarah decided to help God. Somebody said, I think it was Charles Simpson, the child of expediency is always an Ishmael. And when I meditate on Ishmael and his descendants, it creates in me a very strong desire never to produce an Ishmael. If ever Abraham made a disastrous mistake, it was Ishmael. Not merely did Ishmael turn against the promised heir, Isaac, when he arrived, but the descendants of Ishmael have stood in the way of the descendants of Isaac for 4,000 years and still do today. Shouldn't that teach us that Ishmaels are costly? Another interesting thing, I hope I can say this right, Abraham let the initiative pass from him as the head of the house. And he let Sarah make the decision. Sarah said, "Go in to my maid." He did. Some years later, Sarah said, "Get rid of my maid." He had to. If he hadn't let her take the initiative the first time, he wouldn't have had to accept her counsel the second time. Now, let me make it very clear. I believe a man is foolish if he doesn't listen to his wife's counsel. And a woman has many insights a man doesn't have. And in my first marriage with Lydia, I always sought to benefit from her insight. But God also showed me clearly the final decision was my responsibility. And I couldn't pass the buck, as they say. I remember there was a time when we had to make a major decision as to whether we would go to Denmark, Africa, or the United States. And I felt that we ought to go to Africa. Now, my wife and our daughters didn't want to go to Africa. And when you have 8 daughters and a wife, and 6 of your daughters are Jewish, if you don't know anything about female pressure, you're going to learn. Well, it was very hard for me to override Lydia's opinion. But when I was really in turmoil about this, and wondering what I should do, the Lord spoke to me in one of those quiet ways that he does, not audible. And he said, "You do want me to respect you, don't you?" I said, "Okay, Lord, that's what I want." I made the decision, and it was the right decision. There's no doubt about it. And I have to say, to honor Lydia's memory, she said, "I'm going with you to Africa, not because I'm called to Africa, but because I'm your wife. And where you go, I'll go." But in the end, the Lord blessed her ministry there greatly. But that was an example of a case where I had to take the responsibility. And whenever a husband abdicates from that position, trouble will follow. Today, I'm sorry to say, it's the habitual custom of most American husbands to abdicate. In actual fact, in many American families, the major decisions really proceed from the wife. You heard the story about the man who said, "We've been married 22 years and we've never had a disagreement. I said to my wife, you make the minor decisions, I'll make the major decisions. And we've never disagreed. We've never had any major decisions to make." See, this isn't my theme, but I feel I should say it. And I'm pretty well acquainted with this particular area of the United States. All human problems began when 2 things happened. The first man abdicated from his responsibility, and the first woman stepped into his place. That's the origin of all human problems, if on that level. See, in my opinion, Adam shouldn't have allowed the serpent to talk to his wife. He was there to keep the garden, to protect it. The serpent wasn't a beast of the garden, it was a beast of the field. It had no right in the garden. He'd slipped up. And then, of course, you know Ern Baxter's remark about Eve. If only Eve had said, "I never talked to strange snakes without my wife, without my husband," there never would have been a problem. So wives, never talk to strange snakes without your husbands. You say, "Well, strange snakes never come to my house." They might come to your house not dressed as snakes. It's something to counteract anybody's decision, even your daughters. About 3 years ago, many of you know my African daughter, Joska, whom I love dearly and who's a beautiful child. Really a joy to our hearts today, but about 2 or 3 years ago, one of these high-pressure salesmen came to the home, maybe 2 years ago, just after Jessica got a job. And he sold her on credit one of these fancy stainless steel cooking sets to put away in her hope chest. She has a beautiful hope chest, incidentally. But she had to get Daddy's signature. And when she came to me for the signature, I said, Jessica, you can't afford this. You don't need it. It's not going to do you any good. You've got a lot of better things to do with your money than invest in a stainless steel cooking set. And she looked at me and I looked at her and she said, well, if you don't want me to get it, I won't. And I said, I don't want you to get it. And it was really a major point in our relationship. Seems so small. But men, it's so easy to let the initiative pass out of your hands. And I believe the lesson is trouble. I think God is very, very insistent that the responsibility of the male is to take the initiative. That does not mean that a wife doesn't share with her husband, doesn't counsel with her husband, doesn't pray with her husband, doesn't tell him things. I'll tell you frankly here in presence of everybody, I've said to Bob, I said, you have got an unusually discerning wife. She's usually right. You better listen to her. But the decision-making process is his responsibility. And he's not afraid to take it, I know. So that's just by the way, as I say sometimes, no extra charge.